Hello, everybody. Welcome to CNET Presents The Next Big Thing. Great to have you here again this year. I'm Brian Cooley.
And I'm Tim Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is our 14th year of exploring the tantalizing future of devices, and this year we're excited to talk about a coming revolution in how we interact with almost all of our electronics.
Yeah, and Tim and I have been riffing about this, or leading up to this for months. It really is an incredibly rich topic, and I can honestly say we have one of the best panels ever. Stand by for more on that. Sponsored by Toyota. I want to thank them for coming on board and backing this up, a company that I want you to check out on the North Hall show floor as well, doing some really interesting stuff with the big thinking around how vehicles start to work their way through the world. Kind of another issue of interface, if you will. So thank you to get them on board.
Thank you.
Something we still largely do these days by dealing with our devices is by tapping out strings of text. I mean, how many of you are, on your keyboard now, tweeting? Thank you for doing that. Whatever you're doing, checking some email, whatever you got to do. We're still in a QWERTY world in a strange way, except when something more natural is available.
Something like Siri. Now, a lot of you probably have.
How can I help you?
Oh, hi, Siri. I didn't know you were listening.
I'm always listening.
That's a little creepy.
Just a little, yeah. Siri, you are at the forefront of a tech revolution that might finally kill off the keyboard.
All will fall before me.
Can't voice and gesture and everything get along, Siri? Can't we all live in peace and harmony?
I'm sorry, Tim. I can't do that.
Now you're really weirding me out.
This isn't even my final form.
Okay, then let's see Siri in her real and final form. Ladies and gentlemen, the actual voice of Siri. Please welcome Susan Bennett.
Hello.
Hi, Susan.
How are you, Tim?
I'm doing okay.
How are you, Brian?
Now that I know that you're a real person, I feel much better. Welcome to the stage.
It's kind of scary, isn't it?
So how many people have Siri in your pocket right now, or in your hand, indeed? Look at a lot of hands. So you all talk to Siri every day?
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
You know her. Here she is.
Yes.
So let's talk about the history. We were talking a little bit about this before. When was all that recorded?
I did the basic vocabulary for what became Siri in July of 2005, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. Yes, it did rot my brain. No, it was very interesting work. I recorded thousands of phrases and sentences solely for sound and not content. And so I read some pretty strange sentences, such as, militia oi hallucinate, bukra okra ooze.
Wow.
That's what I mean about the brain rotting.
Better you than me.
Yeah.
And this was before Apple was even involved, right?
Right. Apple came in after the fact, actually, and what most people don't know is that Apple didn't really create Siri. They developed Siri. They bought the app from 3 engineers who developed her.
Now, Susan, you come out of a traditional voice artist or voiceover actor background.
Correct.
How did that happen? How did you get called up to do this in this interesting career of voiceover that you did? But this is a very unusual avenue of it.
It really is. I don't really know. I was working for a company that did a lot of
That's like a Siri response.
Yeah.
Hey Siri, how'd you get the job?
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know. Shall I search the web? Don't be tricked by Siri. She does like to give you erroneous information all the time. She's a trickster. Basically, I don't really know, because in 2005, all of that was just, in its, baby, steps at that time.
Yeah.
And of course, the technological uber brains knew what was coming, but most of us just, little worker folks didn't really know exactly where our voices were going to end up. We knew that we were recording for phone systems, but 10 years ago, we certainly couldn't imagine that the phone would be here and interacting with us. So it's amazing.
Very cool. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank the voice of Siri, Susan Bennett.
Susan Bennett.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We might hear from her a little bit more a little later on in the show. Okay, so as we're talking about this broad topic of is typing dead, which is, that's kind of the center of what we're talking about, though there's a little more to interface going on than that. Let's frame the problem. Siri, What's wrong with the world of keypads?
If you're in love with a 140-year-old technology, we need to talk.
Yes, QWERTY, a 140-year-old method of arranging the alphabet to prevent typewriter keys from sticking. And it's still the main organizing principle of our interactions with digital devices.
Cancel my 5 o'clock p.m. appointment.
Yes, there's voice recognition, but too often it's just QWERTY in thin air, at least when it's done badly, forcing you to focus too much on whether or not the machine understood your text rather than your intent. Swipe, drag, and pinch? Better, but not evolved a whole lot from their predecessors on Windows 3. We just spend too much time wrapping ourselves around interfaces to accommodate the hardware that actually get between us and the media, communications, and services we want to use. But that is all suddenly changing on several fronts. Powerful, natural voice recognition is becoming widespread.
Call my brother.
Typically in our phones, soon even in our cars, and our home electronics in the living room. Gesture technology that can read the most organic form of human expression is growing beyond just a novelty or quick game of living room tennis. Our most powerful port, our vision, is being filled with contextual options and offering its gaze as a subtle, nuanced indicator of our attention and interest. And we're using biometrics suddenly for a lot more than just unlocking our phones. Yet as tedious as it is, typing and tapping the old way are entrenched because they have worked so far. Radical new interfaces will face big challenges in user comfort, intuitive design, and hardware and software capability to make them work well. We're here to find out how we really move past the long shadow of QWERTY.
Almost a Star Wars credits effect there on that QWERTY at the end.
Absolutely. A long time ago in a conference room not far away. To help us explore what lies beyond typing and tapping are a collection of great people who are at the forefront of this revolution.
Yeah, like I said, a really amazing panel. We always do, but this one really clears the bar by a much bigger margin. Please welcome, first off, Wendy Ju, Executive Director of Interactive Design Research at Stanford University.
Hey, Wendy. Welcome to the stage. Have a seat, please. And Patty Mays is Department Head and Professor at MIT's Media Lab. Patty, welcome.
Okay, next up we've got Marcus Barrett, who's the Head of User Experience, HMI, at the BMW Group.
Hey, Marcus. Welcome. And Vlad Sonoha is the CTO of Nuance Communications. Hello, sir. Have a seat.
All right, welcome panel. Thank you.
For you.
So, as we get into this, I want to start by framing everyone's point of view for the audience. I don't want to assume, because we come from so many backgrounds and professional verticals and even cultures here as we come to CES. I want to just give a quick thumbnail sketch from our panelists of what they do and what they bring to this panel. So let's start with you, Vlad. What does it mean to be CTO of Nuance, and what point of view do you bring to our discussion?
So, thank you very much, first of all, for having us on this panel. I am CTO of Nuance Communications, which is most familiar to folks as a company that makes speech recognition and text-to-speech or synthetic speech for a lot of different applications. But recently, we have really been moving much more aggressively into understanding users' intents and actually performing a variety of actions of what users want to do for the consumer market, automotive, but also customer care, and a very big effort in healthcare.
Okay, interesting. Marcus, tell us about your role. Thank you, and what point of view you've got here. I mean, you come from the automotive side.
The automotive side, we always have the question of distraction, keeping the eyes on the road, how much load can we bring to the person. So anything you can touch and feel or communicate with in the car comes through our concept division, where we actually look and see that this is automotive capable. Very important to us is that, of course, we bring entertainment as soon as we go in new stages of highly automated driving.
And Patty, of course, we see a lot of great concepts coming out of the MIT Media Lab. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of your work there?
Yeah, so I run a group at the MIT Media Lab focused on coming up with totally new ways of interacting with our devices. Our digital devices are, of course, indispensable these days. We have them with us 24/7. We check them 100 or more times a day. But the way we interact with them is very low bandwidth, both input and output, input being 2 thumbs or 1 thumb in my case. and output a tiny little screen. So we try to rethink totally different or come up with totally different concepts for how we can interact with our devices, ways that are a lot more seamless, more integrated in our physical lives.
And Wendy, tell us what brings you here today.
I'm coming from the Center for Design Research. I'm an interaction design researcher. So I look at how we design behaviors for interactive products such as autonomous vehicles or robots. And I think the point of view I'm really interested in is thinking about implicit interactions. A lot of the things that we use interactive devices for right now, we are focused on. And that's not going to scale because we can't focus on as many things as there are devices that are going to have chips. And so we need to think about how we're going to interact with all the other things in the environment. And that's really what my group is researching.
Great.
Okay, so we've got really outstanding points of view here from great specific experience in each one. Let's get into the different interface that most of us think of and probably use the most now once you do get away from actually tapping on a keyboard. Hey Siri, what do you think about voice control?
Voice control is obviously the superior form of human-machine interaction.
We've been using the humble mouse and keyboard for decades now, and they work great, so long as you're stationary. But once you're on the go, typing on a phone is no fun, and it can be a little distracting. Thankfully, voice control is helping to make things easier. For simple things, we can talk to our smartwatches. Remind me to watch where I'm going, or speak our text messages to our phones. Send a text message to my wife, greetings from Las Vegas, don't worry, I'm not gambling. Not yet anyway. And of course, we can talk to our cars. Find me the closest casino.
Frankie's Tiki Room.
So far, voice has been the best alternative interface that we've developed. It's quick, lets you keep your eyes on the road, and it's getting to the point where it's actually good at figuring out what you mean.
Here's your message. Do you want to send it?
But it isn't perfect. Nobody wants to dictate personal missives in public.
So what time would you like me to come in for the interview?
And office environments are already loud enough without everyone blathering commands into their gadgets. So while voice is a big help, can it get even better? What are the best untapped applications of voice control? And frankly, why did it take so long to get good? Hey, so I may climb into a car there, which happened to be a BMW, and so I think I'm going to start with the first question. On the BMW side of things, we've got pretty good voice control in cars now, but we've had pretty terrible voice control in cars for a long time. Why did it take so long to get to the point where it's actually usable?
Thank you for mentioning that the voice control, which we saw in the 7 Series, really has taken a big leap, I think. Also, thank you to you. It becomes what we call natural language understanding. It is a dialogue. Before we were kind of tied in command language. So we were expecting to say commands to the machine, and it could be only the one single command. And by now we have understood how we variate, like a dialogue, make it a dialogue. One of the things you didn't see, which is very important for that interaction, is that you can also be a little rude. You can interrupt. You don't always have to listen to the entire conversation. Do you want to select 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? You can interrupt. We call it barge in. It was a very, very important step when we went forward in natural language understanding. Why did it take so long? I think computer power and also back-end connection was one of the things that slowed it down. Now we can go to back-end and we can use computer power all in the world to actually give quick answers. And speech lives from being responsive.
And Vlad, can you give us some insight into the background of exactly what's going on and why this is such a difficult technical challenge to understand not only what I'm saying, but what I mean when I say something?
So Marcus is right, first of all, that the connectivity now possible in most modern automobiles is making possible to bring back the very latest technologies from the cloud. The in-car processors as well are very powerful now, and so I think you have seen a kind of a watershed moment, and cars will be as good, if not better, than other devices when it comes to voice control. The automakers have proven themselves to be incredibly aggressive and very innovative in this regard. Now, you're correct that speech recognition and natural language understanding, they are evolving technologies. They will continue to evolve. They're certainly not mature. We've been averaging, for example, about a 20% reduction in the average error rate every year for the last 10 years plus, and that's not stopping. And that means that we can take on much more challenging applications in more realistic environments. and make it work out of the box for a broader percentage of the population.
So I want to have Wendy step in here with your concept of implicit interactions. Is there a juncture here? Is there an application here of the implicit interactions concept when we're talking about voice?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things is right now the reason that voice works is because all the devices that you're talking to are connected to the same system, right? Your voice control might be going through your, you might be talking to your watch, but it's using your phone and it's connected to the cloud. Once you have multiple things that do speech recognition, it starts to get a little confusing who you're talking to, who should be listening. And what people do when they're trying to disambiguate who they're talking to is they orient their body differently. They use their gaze. Sometimes they like lean and point with their body. And that's something that machines don't currently understand, but is a really important implicit thing that people do to disambiguate speech. And so that additional channel of gaze and bodily orientation becomes really important as we move forward with speech.
Patty, you talk about these new technologies for interaction as being, I think, intelligence augmentation, leveraging our strengths and sort of propping up our weaknesses. Does voice fit into that model?
Yeah, I think voice definitely will play a big role, but it's not a be-all, end-all of the future of interfaces. In addition to the privacy problem, which the video alluded to, you have the problem that speaking is actually not a very efficient way to communicate what it is that you want to have done. Natural language is actually very ambiguous, and it's kind of a slow way to express what it is that you want. So I think it will be useful in certain contexts, like driving or when you're multitasking basically and need to do something else. But it will always be limited to certain applications, I think, personally.
Vlad, thoughts to follow on that?
Well, maybe not surprisingly, I have a different perspective on this. We think language is special, and in fact, it's one of the most efficient ways of conveying a lot of rich information across very quickly. It is true that it's ambiguous inherently, but we seem to manage. And the reason we manage is that we have models of the world and models of each other that allow us to disambiguate and very quickly understand the intent. And that's really what the game is all about right now in speech recognition. It's really more artificial intelligence.
Yeah, you're big on moving from recognition to from voice recognition to intent recognition, right?
That's right.
And isn't that kind of the game for all of you?
Yeah, I think it's important that devices in general will have to sort of try to model and detect what our intentions are, what our goals are, what it is that we're trying to do. And that will involve building a longer term model of us so that instead of giving a long sentence to say what it is that you want to have happen, you can just say the usual or something.
Exactly.
So I think that that will be the direction to go in, both for gestural interfaces as well as for speech interfaces, to devices that really look at us, model us long-term, and try to recognize our intentions, our habits, our preferences, etc., so that the interface can be a lot more efficient and highly personalized.
And a lot of that depends on having a profile that's tied to me as an individual, so that they can understand my context. Do you have any thoughts on where that should live? Should that be in our phone? Should that live in our car? I think that's part of the problem right now is we have all these different platforms that are trying to talk together. And it seems like we need to unify things in some way.
Yeah, so one issue is where that lives and also who has access to that. Of course, is a huge issue, which I'm sure we all have our personal preferences for. I think ultimately all that data should belong to the user and should have control over it as much as possible. Yeah.
If I may add to the point before, because I'm going to be mediator here. The issue is, I think it is like in an orchestra. Speech is very, very important. It becomes more important as computer power rises. But the sentiment is, it's like an orchestra. It's one of the instruments. And like you said, gesture helps us to communicate. It takes kids long to make a phone call and actually just use language to get their point across over the air, basically, over a wire, without looking at somebody, pointing at something, illustrating something. This is what we take into consideration very much when we do HMI. When we think about how to communicate with the machine. So we differentiate between fixed modalities, which are like buttons, knobs, things you can press that do a fixed command, and then ambiguous free modalities like speech, gesture that we just introduced, because they are to be interpreted. It makes it natural too. I mean, we started dialogue. That's why I emphasized on dialogue. You need to find out if this is really what you meant.
And you know, in all the cars that we review day in and day out, I don't think I've ever used voice command to set the temperature. Even in many cars that will do it, that just seems like that's not where the richness of voice is going to deliver, right?
That's right. That's right.
And now we're with Patty, right? Try to adjust the fader or something. A little bit more to the back. More, no, less, no, more. Test. It doesn't work. So sometimes you need a knob, sometimes you need interfaces that are different. Voice is truly very powerful, but
I think it's really important, like what's on the other end of that speech system. And one of the issues right now with the speech systems is it's just a speech interface to what's still the old-fashioned button and knob, world. So you don't say like, pick a song I would like, and then get a song that you would like. You ask for very specific songs. So you have to know what bands there are, what radio stations there are. So it depends a lot more on having this really common grounding of what is available, and that's very difficult to communicate via speech.
That's a really great point, if I may comment on that. I think it's always helpful and instructive to keep the notion of a really good human assistant in mind when we're trying to figure out where we're going. If you have a really good human assistant, somebody who's with you, who listens to you, who interacts when you want it to happen, whom you give tasks at a sufficiently high level, you won't ask that person to necessarily raise the temperature for you unless you're far away from the thermostat. I don't know. This is the goal, this is the direction where we're taking these virtual assistants. What you see today is really, in a sense, it's very good, but it's the prehistory.
Let's bring it into a practical issue that I know we all struggle with. So you're in the car, you hit the voice button in your car, and you want to give it a command to do something. And someone else in the car isn't paying attention. They start talking. It's so frustrating. It's like, shh, I'm doing a voice command, right? Stop, start again, cancel. Beep. What do you want? Do that all over and over. We were talking a minute ago, Vlad, about getting to the point where I don't have to worry about that, where the voice command system will hear me in this conversation here and just tune into me the way we all do. I can tune into you like a tunable antenna, even if you're all talking at once. When does voice figure that out, and how?
Well, so it's just around the corner. So you mentioned voice biometrics earlier. That's a very sophisticated technology. It could discern any one of us, even when speaking concurrently. The signal processing that we are jointly putting into the latest cars can actually form a steerable beam that'll pick you out even as you move around as a driver. It can cancel out the other participants in the conversation. And we're not so far away from it listening to you all the time. You have to press the button if you give it the permission to do so.
Getting creepy again.
Right. Yeah, right. It's almost like you'll turn voice off occasionally, as opposed to turning voice on occasionally.
And I forgot to mention even while music is playing, because we can cancel that as well.
Of course.
That's good. Yes. We could talk about voice, I think, all day, but we do have a variety of other gesture interfaces which we move into, as a matter of fact. Hey, Siri, what do you think about gesture control?
Gestures will never capture the fine nuances of the human voice.
Voice control is adding new ways to interact with our devices.
Turn on the porch lights, lock the front door.
But dictation isn't always the best means of control. Sometimes you want something quicker, though, something you can execute, say, with the twirl of a finger. Something like this car, where I can turn up the volume just by doing this. Or I can dismiss a call with the wave of a hand. It's simple and quick and intuitive. And while it isn't always perfect, you can definitely see the potential. Modern cars are getting so complex that it's impossible to add a new dial or button for every new feature, but with gestures, the possibilities are endless. Even more so on our phones and tablets, which soon won't have any buttons at all. But while we've seen some successes, most notably Microsoft's Xbox Kinect system, devices that you can control just by waving your hands about are remarkably few. So if the potential is there, and if the technology is there, what's holding back gesture control? Are we on the eve of a finger-waving revolution? Or has the time for gesture control already come and gone? Patty, I know there's been a lot of interesting gesture control research happening at MIT. I've seen a lot of interesting concepts coming out of there. What sort of things do you think are best suited for gesture control? We talked a little bit about the limitations of voice. What are the limitations of gestures?
Yeah. So I think one of the first sort of developments that we'll see in the commercial realm is gestures that sort of increase the interaction surface of our devices. For example, the problem with smartwatches is that they're tiny for interaction as well as for output. And I think we will start seeing skin input as well as possibly projection near on the arm, etc., to sort of increase the interaction surface. We'll also increasingly, I think, see gestures above devices. So instead of having to use the 2 square inches, you can just sort of wave your hand above the watch that you're dealing with. So I think that's one of the first sort of directions that people will pursue or look at. A second direction is to actually recognize certain symbolic gestures, like the BMW car sort of turn the volume up or ignore that call, etc., as well as sort of gestures that convey intentions. We talked about speech earlier. Speech is actually, or natural human-to-human natural language is very multimodal. We use our hands when we're talking to say, was a fish this big, or I'm actually interested in that camera over there, etc. And so I think that increasingly our devices will start looking at these human gestures and interpreting them. If I pick up a camera here in the exhibit halls, well, that means that I'm interested in that camera. The longer I hold it, the more interested I am. So my devices could actually learn from that I want to get more information about that particular camera, maybe compare it to one that I picked up previously, see how what the differences are, etc. So I think we'll increasingly have our devices sort of watch our gestures and interpret them to recognize what our intentions are, what our interests are, what it is that we're trying to do, and then give us proactively.
So you think you're listening to Patty Mays talk to you. What you're actually doing is watching a really high bit rate presentation. Enormous amount of data is coming off you with your hands, your voice, your inflection, the angle of your eyebrow, the turn of your head, right? I mean, that's a big pipeline of data that we often take for granted and say, oh yeah, pointing is binary. It means yes, it's like a 1. But there's a whole lot of stuff in that, in the arc and the speed and the ballistics of it.
So if I may comment on that, I think gestures and multimodal interfaces are absolutely the way of the future. The one thing we have to overcome, though, is that gestures, at least for the foreseeable future, will have to be taught and learned, because these devices will, unlike with language, where we expect our devices to understand the way we speak, even if it doesn't always happen, the devices will not understand what gestures you're making right now. And that has been an obstacle for other input methodologies over the years, including early pen input. So what are your thoughts about how do we cross that chasm?
Yeah, well, there's actually many different kinds of gestures, and some gestures are natural gestures, like picking something up or pointing at something is not something you have to learn. You just do it, and the device can pick that up. But other gestures, like turning up the volume, etc., are things you have to learn. But in speech interfaces, you also often have to learn what the exact sequence of words is that you have to say to, like, turn the map north or whatever in your car. And so it's similar. You have to learn the vocabulary of gestures, basically.
Speaking of turning up the volume, is this actually easier than just turning it up?
Well, here's maybe, and gesture is complicated. We see this already. Gesture is communication enhancement. There's a couple clear gestures. Those ones you don't want to see in the car. They're cultural, sensitive. They might be, you know, so it's very, very difficult. And every culture does it differently. I could show you some gestures that are okay in Germany.
Please do.
Don't do them here. So we went down a long path when we designed our gesture system. It's very reduced. It's very clear. It's very simple. Also, for what you said, we don't want to make it a sign language. We don't want people to learn 2 or 3 days the gestures that you could use in the car to turn up the volume. So the volume is more the little magic that you can show. And some people actually like it to do it this way. The picking up a call and declining a call is very, very efficient. It's much quicker than taking your eyes off, looking at your steering wheel, finding the button and pushing it.
You just do this,
right? If the traffic does not allow for you to talk, you do this and it's gone. So we see that we want, in this philosophy of multimodality, leave it to the driver, to the consumer in this case, to choose what he likes best. And actually, it comes to you when you drive that car, and then you drive another BMW without the gesture control, and somebody calls you and you do like this and wonder why it doesn't pick up. It's like, you get used to it so quickly. And we've come down a long path, and we believe that we have to take iterations back to why did it take so long for speech? We don't want to burn it. Speech
if I can jump in. I mean, one of the things I think that gesture is most promising for is kind of in conjunction with speech, but kind of as a traffic signal for speech. Like if someone's talking and you want them to talk less, you know, like you don't want to add to the problem by talking more. So a lot of times, so we do a lot of things where we signal that we want to talk, that we want less talking, and that's an important thing to have happen, you know, outside the main focal, you know, line of speech. And so there's a lot of gestures that are natural that work in every culture that are basically like what I'm calling these traffic signals for the main, you know, bit of conversation.
One of the most interesting experiments that I've seen in this is one that you did at Stanford with the automatic door study you did, where she and her team took a regular door in a building and going the other way. Instead of our gestures telling the device about us, the door was moved to tell us about what the device's opportunities and services to us are. Give us a snapshot of how it can go the other way.
Yeah, so we actually just did some experiments with doors. We instrumented a door to make it behave like an automatic door, and then we gestured the door different ways at people. And what we found is that people actually found the doors to be much more engaging and smarter if the doors seemed to pause or think when it was in the way that it was moving. So just a simple pause, you know, as the door was opening, kind of conveyed a lot of intent that otherwise, you know, when it just opens smoothly and linearly, like wasn't there. And that's really important when we start to have devices that think, like how you communicate that decisions are being made and what sort of services are available. One thing I thought that was really funny was that we were studying people interacting with real automatic doors. And my favorite thing is that people would walk up to doors right when a store closed, and they would walk at the door and the door wouldn't open. And then they would walk louder at the door. You know? And I think
walk louder, right?
Yeah, they would. So they don't normally think about the fact that their walking has a communicative, you know, component. But then when something fails, when there's a breakdown, then they like obviously know how to use that. And I actually think if the door would kind of open and then slam a little bit, you'd be like, oh, it's shut, you know. Whereas you know, it just sitting there, you kind of don't know what's going on.
And we're seeing some of that on the automotive space as well, where cars are learning more and more about the approach to the driver thanks to wireless keys and things like that, and cars are actually welcoming drivers to the car, which is great. We're seeing the Tesla Model S door handles extend as you get close, and I believe the 7 Series will illuminate the ground in front of you as well. What other kind of opportunities do you see there? That's an interesting idea for future BMWs, don't you think?
It's a good field to play in, and as you mentioned, we already have the light curtain that we bring out to welcome the person, to actually open it up for him. I mean, in the vehicle environment, obviously, or in a car environment, there's some restrictions. You can't just open the door because you have to understand, is that the right person? Does he want to enter or just walk by and don't knock him off? So there's a lot of things to consider. But yes, we're very thoughtful about how we can make life easier and more convenient and do these things. So we personalize the keys. The seat will be at your personal position if you bring your personal key. So there's no adjustment anymore. So this individualization for the person that actually doesn't drive, we connect this to the intelligence we talked earlier.
There's a obvious connection to be made between understanding what the driver's undergoing and then modulating any, for example, voice language dialogue accordingly. Understanding of what situation the driver's in, are they busy, are they under stress, what is the car doing? So
you might really listen differently based on knowing that?
You might pause the dialogue, you might hold off on certain kinds of interruptions until something transpires. So it really has to be viewed as a holistic single system with a language component, but also the sensors, as well as maybe understanding what gestures the driver's making. you're doing this with a steering wheel, you probably don't want to interrupt you.
We're back to the orchestra. It's not the single instrument,
Right.
it's all that counts. It's look at the face, what is the expression of the face?
And that's what I thought was interesting that you mentioned, Marcus, is you're bringing in these layers of interfaces that each driver will gravitate to differently in a different mix in your car. Because I kind of come to the auto space always looking for some reduction. Let's get down to the right solution, singular. As I think we do with a lot of technologies. We want to simplify and winnow things down, but it may be that, no, it's the right mix, the right orchestra, as you say, is the long haul, and that we're not necessarily, maybe we're going the wrong direction, saying, okay, when are we going to winnow the rest of them out and get down to the best one? There's a bunch of best ones, depending on the mode and the user times different modes. It might not be just one reductive thing.
I absolutely agree. This is the way we go. We let the consumer decide. Also, our cars drive around the world, so there's situations where you drive more, there's situations you stand still more. And we can show in studies that people that stand still like to touch. It's the direct interface. While you drive, you like rather the knob operation, right? Because it's very clear, you can do it blindly, it doesn't interrupt you so much, and it's very convenient.
BMW didn't give us a touchscreen till last year.
But now we do.
There's one cultural difference. I don't think Germans like messy fingerprints on
Exactly, but I persuaded them. No, I didn't, but we did. We will have
that was my private theory. I'm not sure it's true, but I won't put you on the spot now.
That's fair. There we go.
All right, so that, we've gone through voice, and we've gone through a big piece of gesture, too, that I think we all have a fair amount of familiarity with. And if you don't, make sure you try all of those in various forms that are here at the show floor. Let's go to another chapter. Siri, you aren't exactly news anymore. What's the next big thing in interactions?
You must be an Android user.
Voice and gesture are interactive styles that we know when we're using. But soon we may add some interfaces so innate and implicit that we barely notice we're doing them. Glassware, for example, isn't gone, it's just being retooled, because the potential benefits of having contextual information in front of your gaze, combined with a device that knows your location, position, and direction you're looking, can really tap into our most powerful sense and what it says about our intent. Today's biometric technology is used mostly to record stairs, steps, and sleep, or unlock our phones. But there's a higher goal: to be used to glean a little peek into our mental state as well. The objects and spaces around us should know we're around them, whether it's to warn a nearby car to avoid a collision, or to make a retail product come to life when our proximity to it suggests we're interested in it. Even the low-tech office chair or car seat could become a measure of our state when fitted with sensors. All these part of a future where you may express yourself almost as much by just being as by talking, typing, or liking.
But you'll still have me in your ear.
I'm not sure we'll ever get rid of Siri at this point. She's still back there. So this is getting a little farther into the future, where we get to just, I think that last line, just being starts to tell more about us. Are we kind of too far off the pier here into even expecting that anytime soon? Gaze, for example, Patty. We talked a lot about gaze. You seem to be high on starting to tap into that.
Yeah, well, gaze is, of course, again, a way in which people express their intentions and their interests. So I think there's a huge potential for using gaze in a variety of contexts. We've done things from just looking at devices to then address them, and then whatever gestures you use are addressed to that device, and the volume up or down, or the lights go on or off, etc. So it just simplifies things if you can use gaze as an additional input sort of in interfaces.
And are sensors good enough at this point to really do that reliably, especially on a mobile device where you might really want that kind of functionality?
Well, on mobile, we're starting to work on gaze in virtual reality and augmented reality headsets, actually, but we don't really, other than that, it's all stationary types of things like built into a desktop, things like that, or put into a room and so on.
And Wendy, this gets into the idea of proximity can do a lot to accurize and focus other interactions, right?
Right. I mean, I think one of the things is that we do a lot of things where we stand in front of something, we orient our bodies, and that how we position our bodies actually says a lot about what we want to have happen. And actually devices can do the same in kind. If they're offering a service to someone, they can come up closer to you. And I think a lot of the robotics technologies that we're looking at have that potential. Like if something is being offered, like, I mean, very simple things, like just something that can collect your trash, you know, it can come and you know, bring itself closer to you instead of you having to walk to it.
Now, we've seen gaze in cars, Marcus, for drowsiness detection primarily. I don't know, it seems like it's fairly useful, but I don't know. Where do you feel gaze in vehicles is at now in its life? Is it still an infant? Is it a teenager? Is it, how mature is it?
It's a teenager.
Okay.
We're looking into gaze a lot for several reasons. So drowsiness detection is one of the things that you can actually try to work on, and also selecting things, right? You could, you know, you cursor something with your gaze if the pickup, the sensor arc is good enough. And then, but how do you select? Or did you just look to get informative? So that's something that we work on very, very intensively. I mean, you just put out some use cases. The ideal case is you look somewhere and say, do I have to go there? And your car is so intelligent, sees where you look, has the navigation information, knows the traffic situation, and it can just help you. And then voice comes in place, and you get a voice command, because writing it somewhere down there doesn't help you at that moment because you're looking somewhere. So it's, again, the orchestra. So teenager.
Okay.
We're there.
And it also comes into play in the role of autonomy as well, so that the car can figure out if you're able to take over control of the car, right, if it needs to?
Absolutely, yes. It's also a portion of when we go to autonomous driving that we know in which state the driver is and how long it will take him to
So if
get
I'm
back.
asleep at the wheel and the car needs to hand over control, it will know to wake me up somehow, hopefully.
Yeah.
We talk to a lot of our partners at CNET who are you know, looking at fitness bands, let's say, and say, all right, that's for stairs, steps, sleep, heartbeat, and that's all about fitness and health generally. How does it go beyond that? And I think you can read, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think you can read into someone's intent or into their mental state based on their fairly crude physical assays. I mean, if I'm at a high heart rate or very low or highly fluctuating, you can kind of start to winnow down where my head's at, right? To some degree?
Yeah, there's a whole research area called affective computing, where we basically try to read someone's mood or emotional state based on multiple types of sensors. Some of them are cameras, others are heart rate sensors, and other things. And you can get at things like stress in a car, for example. You can detect that the driver is stressed, maybe then put on some nicer music or calmer music, or maybe you detect that they're not excited enough, they're a little bit drowsy, sleepy, and you can put on exciting music, and yeah.
Automatic passive sport mode.
That sounds pretty great. Just want to take one moment to say we are going to be taking questions from the audience. So if anybody has a question, please go ahead and make your way. There's a microphone in the middle of the room. There may be even more hiding back there. I'm actually not sure. The
We can
lights
see one.
are a little bit bright.
Yep.
But anyhow, if you have questions, please go ahead and get lined up. But in the interim, we'll keep talking.
I was watching your video, the augmented reality segment, and I think that is a technology with a huge potential. In my view, its biggest obstacle right now, besides the eyewear, which we have to get used to, is the overload of information. And we have to find a good way of allowing a user to filter out and select what they want to see when. But I think that there's a marriage made in heaven waiting to happen between that and the virtual assistant, where the augmented reality is allowing your virtual assistant that you control through language and maybe gestures to selectively communicate to you information about who's that person in the audience, or where's their nearest parking lot, and be shown an arrow on your screen. But as a standalone technology, it's missing something.
And that would bring in gaze, proxemics, all these other implicit things that I might do. I might open or close to saying hi to someone. Right?
I mean, I actually would take a point of opposition. I mean, I think one of the things going into the future is that our most valuable resource will be our attention. And I think one of the things that's really dangerous about augmented reality is this kind of ability for a machine to kind of occupy aspects of our attention without our necessarily wanting them to. And maybe one solution is that we have really wonderful personal assistance technology that filters that really well. But I think one of the ways that gaze will become really important is monitoring people's attention and helping devices budget the way that our attention is being used. You know, and I think in a lot of ways, the way that that's most useful is not going to be kind of leaping in front of you. It's going to be very subtle. It's going to be managing the traffic flow of information that might flow to you, so that you're not constantly distracted.
So there's a risk in the early years of these very much rich intent, passive drivers of interfaces to get really messy, really busy, right? And just, oh, I can help you, I can help you. Everything we do is suddenly trying to help us. I move, I gaze, I yawn, on my eyes get a little bit low, and every system is trying to help me, right? And it's like, okay, stop. The filtering is tough.
Is this going to change our interactions with each other? I mean, if we have devices that are monitoring everything that we do, that we're, you know, I'm doing this on my watch, or I'm pointing at somebody to find out, you know, pointing at somebody is a rude gesture in general. How is society going to handle all this? Look at you, Patty.
Yeah. Well, this is going further into the future, but basically, I think our devices now are with us from, say, age 12 or so. Again, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They actually, if they model our behavior, they have the potential to know us better than our brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, spouses, because they're always with us. They can see how we react. They can know what our emotional state is, etc. And I think that the devices in the long-term future will actually help us with things like communication and maybe give us advice. And sort of encourage us to be a little bit more bold, maybe if we're shy, or to shut up if we talk too much, or things like that. They'll help us be sort of become a better version of ourselves by being sort of a partner. We'll ultimately all be cyborgs.
Yeah, I went through a lot of speech therapy when I was a kid, and it was always a question of, you know, instructions and assignments that I had to do on my own, but I can imagine having, you know, the therapist basically in my ear all the time would have been incredibly, I mean, it would have been annoying perhaps, but also would have been very, very productive.
Yeah,
I think we have our first question.
Oh, good. Sir, tell us who you are and what your question is. We know, what kind of work do you do?
Hi, I'm Lambert David. I'm a technologist, I guess. I had a question about AI and interaction, and I'm just thinking about Internet of Things is a big topic here at CES, and you talk about interactions. Do you think there's any scope for actually adding character to our devices so that we actually feel like we want to talk to them as real things? And I mean things like, when we buy devices, can we select how much humor they have and almost make them a personality, so that when we want to interact, we're actually interacting with a real, almost like a real thing, like we do with our pets, who maybe not necessarily understand us, but we talk to them like they're real things and like they do understand us. Would that increase the way the devices would then understand us?
So Thomas, the question is the future Star Trek, where it's just a computer voice that knows what we're saying, or is it Star Wars, where we have all these characters that we can interact with?
Yeah, do we anthropomorphize our devices to have a better relationship with them?
Any thoughts?
I mean, I think this is one of those things where you can't not communicate. I mean, everything has a personality, and whether you mean for it to or not. And so either it's one that you actually actively designed, or it's one that just sort of came out. But I don't think that it's possible to design any of these interactive systems so they don't have a character.
And we seem to have a natural proclivity or need to personalize even devices that are very far from human-like characteristics. And I think it'll be very individual. I think it'll reflect the personality of the owner. One important thing in these more and more artificial intelligence systems is to create a model that you as a user understand of what that device is about, what it knows, to ground the dialogues. And I think having a personality will be part of that.
Let's go to our next question. Who are you and what do you want to know?
My name is Gonzalo de la Torre, and I was just wondering, as you were speaking about this intention and about this this desire to have a very unique relationship with the gadgets in our space, is there a priority in design to take in consideration the relationships that we have? Meaning, because if I become closer to my phone, I'm hearing like this desire to have a closer relationship to things, but what about peers? And it seems that or at least I don't know if it's only me that it's seeing this a mental health component in our relationship with technology, and is that taken in consideration in design?
That's a very interesting question.
Are you referring to sort of the scenario of the movie Her? Certainly
sounds that way.
But yeah, I think especially we talked a little bit about augmented reality technologies and how those will be very exciting, but at the same time, the worry there is that because they're in front of our eyes and on top of our faces, we will actually be able to relate less, possibly to other people or communicate to other people because we have something right here sort of that takes priority. So, so yeah, I think there's definitely a worry there that it will diminish human relationships.
It certainly could make losing your phone a lot more traumatic, too.
Tears instead of mere beads of sweat.
Next question, please.
Hi, I'm Gary Stromolo. I'm interested in user experiences. It worries me that we try to introduce so many new ways of doing some very simple technologies. Like, you know, we're going to swizzle stick the volume because we can't simply touch a button on the steering wheel to raise volume, which we already have. Voice is a nice way to do things, but no one really seems to focus on the fact that if we're trying to speak English to a car system, and we're doing it with a German accent or with a Chinese accent, that's really hard to understand. But no one really focuses on that. They expect that the person speaking English is doing it with a newscaster's enunciation. Right? Everything is perfect. The next big thing, perhaps, and maybe this is a question for you, don't you think that the next big thing could be a system that really works robustly? Let's not look for 16 different ways to do it. Let's find the one or two ways and really make sure that they work for everyone. Why is that so hard?
Vlad, tell us about...
So the first part,
yeah.
You couldn't be more wrong. Let me explain. Particularly in the automotive industry, we work with systems that are going to be used, for example, a navigation system by a German driver driving through France, trying to pronounce French place names. You can imagine the linguistic richness in that.
The richness.
In China, there's a concept of borrowed words, where a given speaker will typically use or draw upon a subvocabulary of words from English and other languages. The set varies. It's on top of one's own regional dialect, and the pronunciation of those borrowed words are really all over the map, ranging from really good English pronunciations to something you wouldn't recognize. This is very much a central problem for us, but as I said earlier, it's an evolving technology. Every year it gets better. Some problems are still hard for us, but not for lack of work.
I want to point out that people cheat when they're doing speech recognition. They are looking over the transom and saying like, oh, well, I can read their lips, and I can see the context, and I can guess what they're doing, and they can use all these things to disambiguate what is always often very cloudy speech. And that's something that's difficult for current systems to do, but that's one reason to do multimodal research.
Audiovisual speech is an active area of research, of actually using a camera to follow the speaker's lips and correlate that with the auditory information that we get.
Interesting. Okay, next question, please. And thank you for that one.
Thank you, yes.
Hi there, my name is Stephen Israel. I had a question kind of relating to the personality question that the other gentleman asked.
Speak of us a little bit. We want to hear you loudly.
Oh, sorry. I had another question was related to the other gentleman's question about personality, which is more a question for Vlad, really, which is how did you go about choosing the voice for Siri, both the American Siri and the international ones? And also, does Siri, the British Siri, for example, have the same sense of humor that the American Siri has?
Well, is that something that you can speak to?
So I really can't comment on Apple's choices in this regard, but maybe, Marcus, you could speak about how a customer of speech technology would go about designing a personality or asking us to set the personality.
Well,
Sorry for throwing this in.
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's, and it's a super interesting question. I think once we get to that, we're happy with our speech systems as we are now. Now we're starting thinking about these kind of things. We try to be as neutral as possible in our vehicles. Obviously, when we choose voices, when we choose things. Siri, I believe, offers you can have a male voice, you can have a female voice. So there has been done a lot of research, but we want to stay as neutral as possible on that item. And very important, I think, to understand is speech to text and text to speech are two totally different things. So the machine can maybe do the one thing good, but the other one it lacks. So take your case, you pronounce a name, you speak German and you pronounce a French name, it might pick it up because the systems are intelligent enough, but when it repeats it out to you, it sounds totally different. It's because it's a different technology, and this you still have to take into account and work out. And hopefully we get there someday by picking up what the person said, finding the right phrase, and kind of giving it back without recording it and playing it back, because that's also silly. It's a very, very technology. It's a tricky technology there.
I think we have time for one more question.
My name is Jeff Orgel. I'm a technological generalist, I suppose. In regards to the relationships with technologies, is there a tipping point or a boundary framework where you are looking for what would augment reality versus what might detract from our humanity? At what point do you help an individual without taking from their base nature and maybe their own strength-building nature?
Interesting. At what point are we helping so much that we're re-engineering ourselves?
Well, I think that's, I mean, thank you for that question. I think that's the best question of today. I think we're not having enough discussions about how we are changing ourselves by adopting all these technologies, basically, because we are changing ourselves. I no longer know the telephone number of my kids because my phone remembers it. So there's all these things that we're starting to delegate to technology, and we no longer then have that capacity to do those things ourselves. And I think we should have more discussions, basically, and where we reflect deeply about how, in what ways we want to change us and what that means for our technologies.
Great.
I would like,
unfortunately. I'm a technology optimist, and I think we're a very adaptive species, and we don't have to look that far back to a time when people thought that everybody's access to books was a bad thing, that books were only for a select elite, and terrible things would happen if the peasants got their hold on all this terrible information. Yes, I think we should be very thoughtful about what we do, how we go about it, but this is power, this is enhancing us, this is information. It's up to us to use it for the good.
When do you get the last word?
Oh, I was going to say we shouldn't pose technology in opposition to humanity. I think the ways that we design the humanity can, the technology can be more or less human, more or less social, and so it's really up to us to design things that help put us in contact with other people. I mean, you don't remember the number for your children, but you're still talking to them. You know, and so I think that is the really important thing, that at the end of the day, we're thinking about how we're using the technology. But I don't think it inherently makes us less human to have it.
All right. Please give a big hand to our great panel.
For our entire panel, yes, thank you. Wendy Zhu from Stanford, Patty Mays from MIT, Marcus Parent from BMW, and Vlad Sinoha from Nuance. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you being here with us today.